Well, hello, everybody. My name is Lee Schwartz, and I'm the Director of Business Development for SVA Certified Public Accountants. I'd like to welcome you to part one of our Economic Impact webinar series. Today's topic is a view of the economic climate and how it impacts your business. But before we get started, I just want to take a quick sec and say a few words about SVA. Our vision is to remain independent, and our goal is to continue serving the same clients we have since 1974, closely held businesses, family-owned businesses, nonprofits, and high net worth individuals. And our mindset is that when you're a business owner or shareholder, that business is more than just a job. It's going to affect you personally. So it's important that your advisors are not just about compliance, but working collaboratively with you in a consultative way. And that's our goal. And this webinar and others like it are just one small way in which we do that. Now, before I bring in our speakers, let me just talk a little bit about the format today. We typically save questions until the end, but we want today to be very conversational between our speakers, and we want to be interactive with you. So please chat in your questions as you have them, and I will do my best to make sure they get asked and answered at the right time. And one of the things that'll make this fun, but also very challenging, is that we have a very wide array of companies and industries attending today. There are quite a few manufacturers, contractors, veterinarians, nonprofits, dental practices. We've got restaurants, hotels, real estate investors and developers, medical practice. We're covering the whole gamut. And that leads me to introducing our speakers because both of them have very diverse client bases. So they'll be able to speak to different industry challenges. So first off, we have Nancy Melberg out of our Brookfield office. Nancy leads our Management Advisory Services group. We also have Nikki Grollup out of our Madison office, and she leads our hospitality industry group, but also works with clients in transportation, manufacturing, construction, and many others. So let's start here. Let's get a pulse of where everybody's head is at. There is a lot happening out there. We're going to talk about some of the global and economic factors affecting pretty much everything. But we're not global economists. We're going to focus on what you can do to be ready for whatever comes your way. So with that in mind, here are the four main topics we'll be covering, and we want to get a sense of what you want to hear about the most. So is it historical data challenges, inventory level planning, labor challenges, or supply chain impacts? Let's give you a sec to answer that, and we can use that information to kind of affect our approach today. I have my guesses what I'm going to see. Yeah, that's what we thought. All right, labor challenges coming in at 61%, followed by supply chain impacts and historical data challenges, then inventory level planning. All right, you hear that, Nancy? We're going to cut your piece down a little bit. So we will spend more time in labor challenges. That'll be in a little bit, but let's start with historical data challenges. Okay, Nikki. So look, we work for a CPA firm. Yes, we're consultants, but we like the numbers, don't we? Can you talk a little bit about the importance of just having reliable data and information that you can rely on?
Yeah, absolutely, Lee. So our historical data has always been really important to our business. You know, how many times have you talked about business owners just running the business based on their gut feel? You know, they used to maybe be okay when you had consistency. However, in the current economy where we do not have consistency, we don't know what to do. So without having appropriate data, we're so reactive, and we're usually just way too late to the game to make the changes relevant to have a successful and thriving business.
So let's talk about maybe some changes that companies have been making over the last couple of years to make sure that the data that they do have is actually reliable. I mean, have you seen a move towards more technology and more reliance on systems that can produce the kind of reporting that people really need and want?
Yeah, certainly. So some of some of the older, more dated systems, it was just a platform that you got what you got, right? The system was only going to give you a certain amount of reports, and that's all you were able to do. So currently, businesses have so much data that it's, hey, how do I use it, and what do I need to look for? So I see a lot of businesses looking at key indicators and looking at other things, that other graphs and charts and other items in a different way than they ever did before. Also, I see a lot of change to some more robust systems to get more of that data out in a more useful format. So yes, there has been a significant amount of change as far as how people are collecting data, but more importantly, how they're utilizing their data.
And
well, and go ahead, Nancy.
I think one of the things that's so important right now on top of that, as you talk about looking forward and not looking back as much, because we can't rely as much on that historical, is the importance of really having projections and budgets. So, or performas and budgets. And I think that there is a little bit of a misconception that if I have a budget, that's all I need to do, and I'm going to track my budget to my actual. But I think you need to go a step beyond and prepare a performa or a projection. And that's based on where I am today, where I expect to be. Where a budget is, you're going to put the numbers and you're going to track how you're tracking against your budget. But a performa is changing. And I think it's really, really important to be looking at where you think you're going to be based on where you are today. And I'm going to talk a little bit when we get into inventory too about scenario planning. And so I think that's one thing you can do when you're doing these performas is have different scenarios in play. You know, you want to plan for things. And if this happens, then what is the impact going to be to my business? So I think that's really important right now as well.
And Nancy, our historical data used to be how we decided what we were going to budget for, what we were going to forecast for. However, it's a lot less useful than it ever was before because it's dating out so quickly. So before, when you'd sit down to start, you look at, okay, what did I do in this month last year? Well, when looking, now we're in October of 2022, looking back at October of 2021, if we would have taken that approach, we would have missed the boat. We wouldn't have gotten ourselves, and we wouldn't have gotten our numbers to where they actually are now. So that's where there's a little bit of a hesitancy on the historical data. Well, we can use that. We need to put a lot more meaningful thought into those projections and budgets to really try to hit the mark.
And I think in addition to that, the next step going beyond that is being willing to make changes and making quick changes. You need to react quickly, as Nikki said. And Nikki, one of the things I found very interesting that you had mentioned to me at one point is in your dealing with restaurants, is that you tell them not to print their menus or laminate them right now because they're going to be spending a lot of time and money laminating because prices are changing so quickly that you need to react quick. So this is a place where people can perhaps save some cost, unnecessary cost, by making those simple changes or doing those things. And that's something that had really stuck with me. So any restaurants on the line, you might want to give Nikki a call. She's probably got some more ideas.
So, let's come back to that pricing conversation, because I think that'll be really interesting to people too. But before we get there, can you guys maybe share some examples of how different types of businesses are, they might have relied on some of the same data in the past, but knowing that you can't do that, how do you suggest, let's maybe start with a contractor. How do you suggest they plan for the future in this area without being able to look to the past?
Yeah, so I work a lot with contractors, and one of the things that, I'm constantly telling them is if you have a fixed fee contract, you really need to have an escalation clause, a contingency in there, because if we have a contract that's a 12-month contract and perhaps there's some supplies that are needed in the 8th or 9th month, it's going to be very difficult to know what those supplies or materials are going to cost right now. So we really need to be monitoring that. I happen to work with a lot of home builders too. And one of the things that I'm constantly telling them is we need to constantly be changing our base price on our models. We can't rely on the base price models that we had 2 years ago, a year ago, even 6 months ago. I mean, those are things that need to be constantly changing anytime you have a long-term contract like that because of the uncertainty today. And I'm hoping that we get to a point where maybe we're a little bit ahead of the game and we can back up a little bit, but so far I haven't seen that.
So let's get back to that pricing conversation. Yeah, Nikki, working in hospitality, working with a lot of restaurants. Let's maybe start with that industry. We can talk about others as well, but talk about how often people should be analyzing their pricing.
Quite honestly, Lee, it's a continuous thing. So before businesses might have looked at it, monthly, that would probably be the most they looked at it. They might have looked at it quarterly. You have some that you want to shrink, maybe they only looked at it annually. But in reality, is how often are you giving pay raises? How often are your prices increasing? That's how often you need to be doing it. So it's continuous. And there used to be, let's take restaurants, for example, seasonal business. So they're used to dealing with some of this uncertainty. They've also had, there's always been volatility in some food, seafood and beef and some dairy products. So they're used to some of the volatility, but now the volatility is every single ingredient, right? And you never know which one it's going to be from week to week or month to month. So you need to continuously be looking at it. And you can't look at your financial statements to say, oh, my margins have decreased. Now I need to increase costs. You're too late if you've done that. You need to be looking at your costs and you need to do it simultaneously because you don't want to see that dip in your financial statements to make that decision. You need to make that decision before you get there.
And one of the things that I want to point out too when we're looking at gross profits is if you're a distributor and you're doing exactly what we say is you're reacting quickly to price increases. If you had a price increase coming on January 1st and you knew that that was going to be your increase and you raise your prices January 1st, keep in mind that you might have inventory depending on what your inventory turn is. You could have inventory in your warehouse that you bought a month ago, 2 months ago. So you may have a couple months where your gross profit margin looks higher because you've increased prices, but you're selling that inventory that you had a month or 2 months ago. So there may be some slight fluctuations in your gross profit margin as you go through this process of raising prices. And I know that raising prices is always difficult for people. I know we struggle with it in our industry as well. It's just something that you never want to do, but the reality is everyone is having to do it right now. If you want to survive and be relevant in your industry and your business, I think it's something that everyone has to be looking at because everybody else is doing it.
Any examples you guys have from other industries from a pricing perspective? I mean, Nikki, you've talked a little bit about restaurants, Nancy, a little bit about contractors or home builders. Any other industries that you want to touch on?
Honestly, Lee, I think this goes across the board. I think it's every industry. The one thing that we haven't really talked a lot is service industries and us being a service provider. As Nikki's going to talk about soon, the labor shortages. I think that is really, really impacting pricing of any type of service industries as well, is because we don't sell materials or products, we sell hours, labor hours. And so as the shortage continues to increase in some of the labor shortages that we're seeing, I think that's affecting a lot of service industries as well. And I think sometimes people tend to forget that, but it is really across the board, I think, right now.
It's interesting. We those of you veterinarians who are on right now, please sign up if you haven't already for our webinar tomorrow. We're going to be revealing the results of our veterinary survey. But one of my main takeaways from that was, out of the however many practices around the state of Wisconsin that participated, there was not one that answered that they did not increase their fees in the last year. So out of, I think it was maybe 50 or 60 practices, not one said, no, we didn't increase. On the dental side, there were a handful, but some on the dental side even increased a couple times throughout the year, which is not typical for their industry. So yeah, it's everywhere. Well, let's get a pulse of where everybody who's on right now, kind of what their approach has been historically to analyzing pricing. How often do you do it? Is it weekly, monthly, biannually, annually, or whenever we feel like it. And just as you're filling that out, I want to remind everybody, please chat in your questions. We're going to move on from the historical data challenges here in just a moment. But if you do have questions as we go through things, please chat them in. Love to hear them. Okay, so annually is the biggest answer, followed by biannually. So you're talking for the most part, 60%, 58% of people on the call are saying 6 months or more. So that'll be an interesting thing to see how that changes. It would be great if we could do like a 1-year follow-up and see how that's changed since. So let's move on to the next section, supply chain impacts. Nancy, I touched on it before. There are a lot of factors affecting supply chain right now. Do you want to just kind of touch on some of those?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So I want to say that I could probably do a webinar on this topic for a whole day by myself, just on this topic, but I'm going to try to keep it to a minimal here. I think before we start to talk about some possible solutions, I think it's really important that we look at what's causing the problem. And I think really to sum it up, anybody who's taken, economics, it's supply and demand. We've had limited resources and there's been unlimited wants and needs for certain products. And some of the issues that are happening around the world right now are not helping. We have rising cost of living, inflation, food costs. And I think the big question right now that is on everybody's mind is, will people start to cut back? As we start to see inflation rise, there's a lot of uncertainty whether people will start to cut back, and then we're going to see our demand decrease. So will that flip a little bit? The problem is it's hard to plan for. I think we thought that was going to happen maybe in the housing industry as interest rates continue to rise. But in Wisconsin, at least, we haven't seen a huge decrease in housing. So I think that's going to be tough to plan for. We have these labor shortages that Nikki's going to talk a little bit more about. And this goes across the board. We've got truck driver shortages. We've got people's, dock workers striking. There's issues in other countries, the labor that's affecting us, dock workers, for example. Then we have energy shortages. So right now we're looking at rising gas prices, energy shortages. And I just read something the other day, which Nikki, maybe this is part of the rising food costs you talked about, was that I believe it was actually in Ukraine, where they're having an issue right now with fertilizer, that a majority of the fertilizer is coming from there. And because of the shortage in fertilizer, and this is also due to some labor energy shortages, that it's causing people to not be able to fertilize their crops, which is causing a food shortage. So a lot of these things are repeated. I mean, you're going to see very similar, trends in everything that's causing this. We have geopolitical uncertainty right now, the war in Ukraine. We've got the tension between US and China, what's going to happen there. And then I think the big one that I actually see that affects most of my clients that are distributors is extreme weather. When you look back, we've had a lot of bad weather in the United States. We've had droughts, we've had flooding, we've had hurricanes, wildfires. And I didn't actually realize until maybe it was last year how many manufacturers are actually located in Texas. And when Texas had all that flooding, I had a lot of clients that couldn't get materials. So these are just some of the things that are causing this shortage in our supplies. So a couple of the things that I think that we can do, solutions to this, is the first thing is we really need to optimize our network of suppliers. So this is kind of contradicts what I said to people probably 3 or 4 years ago, that you want to focus on a supplier, you want to get rebates, you want to optimize your spending with that supplier so you can optimize rebates. You can ignore all that right now. Right now, the game is optimize your suppliers, have a backup, know that if you can't get a product that you need, who's your backup for that supplier? You got to have backups there. Some of the things you can look at too are suppliers that are located close to maybe where you need the product, and maybe not focusing so much on a supplier that's located in an area that has very high rising costs. I don't know if any of you have been following the news with the gas prices in California, but I almost fell off my chair when I heard $8 a gallon for a gallon of gas in California right now. So I think it's important that you kind of try to find suppliers maybe that are a little bit more local. I think the other thing is, and Nikki touched on this too, again, a theme, is really getting some decent software in place that's going to really give you good visibility into your inventory and your numbers. People have to know their inventory. They have to know what they need, when they need it. They have to plan for it. You know, the olden days of us just going in the back and looking to see what we had in the warehouse, those days are gone. You have to know, and you have to plan for what you need and forecast that. Another thing that you can do, and this kind of is controlling your costs and keeping things moving, is look at product changes or replacements. Is there any way that you can sell or make what you're doing with a replacement product? Is it worth spending some time and energy in engineering to figure out if there is a replacement to that product that you just can't get right now? So I think that's important for people to kind of think outside of the box a little bit and say, what can I replace it with? I talked a little bit about the forecasting and scenario planning. Again, I think that's very important. We've already talked about that. Know your inventory. This is really important. Just keep a good pulse on it. And if you have the ability to add inventory that you know you're going to sell or that you need, add it. It may cost a little bit more, but there is a very fine line there between adding too much. So again, as you're planning, you got to be careful, because you don't want to have too much inventory, because that inventory can end up being obsolete then. But I think the two things to me that I think are the most important is communicate to your customers and offer good client service. I think the biggest problem, and I know it's something that has frustrated me in the past year, is communication. I went to buy, I'm just going to give you an example. I went to buy a refrigerator from a big box store, and they promised me that the refrigerator would be delivered on this date. And it was about 10 days from the date I bought it. I was thrilled because I had heard about the appliance shortages we were having, and people were waiting 12 months to get appliances. Needless to say, the 10 days came and went, and 4 times they changed my delivery date on my appliance. The 4th time, I said, we will bring a truck and we will pick it up at your store. And they, backpedaled a little bit. And at the end of the day, they finally admitted that they didn't have the refrigerator, and they had no idea when they were going to have it. And needless to say, my frustration level with them was about this high, because I think had they been honest with me and had they communicated that up front, I think the entire experience would have been different. And I did go somewhere else where they were very honest with me about what they had and when they could get it. And I was okay with that. And I ended up buying from that particular supplier. So I think it's really important that people are honest with their customers right now, and they're honest with their employees, because you don't want employees over-promising to customers. The employees need to be aware of what's going on as well, and just make sure that you're providing good customer service. At the end of the day, everybody wants to know that they're important, and that what you're doing for them, you're doing for them, and that it's not just, well, this is the way things are going right now in the world, we can't change it. I think you need to just really offer some good service to them. And again, just continue to communicate. So I think those are some of my things that I can offer on that. But, I think it's still going to be a rocky road for a little while yet. And we're going to see ups and downs, and we have to just continue to try to work through them. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it did. That was great. I think, you talked about transparency. I know we'll come back to that in a little bit too, but just maybe wrapping up the supply chain piece. You talked about having diversity in your suppliers, or having at least additional options. There had been talk for a while about, okay, so a lot of companies historically have looked for the lowest cost supplier. Maybe that was China or somewhere abroad. Have you seen companies, try to move to more domestic or even local suppliers? How's that working?
I have, and honestly, I've had a couple companies that have actually considered starting their own manufacturing because of the struggles of getting the particular product here. They looked at, what do I need to do to start to manufacture that myself? I actually had a distributor that bought a manufacturer because 75% of their product was coming from one manufacturer, and they wanted to make sure that they could control when they got it, how they got it. So they actually bought the manufacturer. So I do think people are doing everything they can, and they're definitely, they're looking outside the box for solutions right now.
Okay, anything else to add on supply chain? I want to make sure we have enough time for labor challenges. I know that's where the bulk of the interest is. Good. All right.
We should jump there.
Yeah, I think so. So, yeah, Nancy, you talked about all the economic factors, the global, the macroeconomic factors. One of the things we're still seeing is low unemployment rate, which is obviously affecting, I'm sure, everyone who's participating today. So, can you just, sorry, actually, Nikki, if you don't mind, how do you talk to clients about managing labor costs, and are these labor costs sustainable? Like, what's happening out there?
Yeah, gosh, I wish I had like the silver bullet answer, right? I don't think that answer exists. And I should have done a poll question, but how many people have had employees come to them disappointed with their raise that it's less than inflation, right? We're getting it all the time. And, reality is wages aren't tied to inflation. Wages are tied to supply and demand. Unfortunately, the wage increase is right up there with inflation due to the supply and the demand. So I think we need to, businesses need to be very strategic on what they're doing right now. So, a lot of times we react really quickly because we have an employee in our office that's unhappy, and many businesses can't look to sustain another loss of an employee. So might make a rash decision. So need to really think about it and have a plan in place. So oftentimes, raises obviously go year after year after year. So is there something, should we consider a spot bonus? Should we consider just increasing the bonus plan or bonus potential to try to get employees what they are demanding now? Unfortunately, it's an employee's market. So get employees what they're demanding now, but not having too many overcompensated employees once the supply demand situation changes. So, the fear is, and we've seen it before, we see it a lot, as, hey, I want to get this key employee. Well, right now, when you're getting a key employee, you're paying a premium, right? So is that sustainable? Even keeping some key employees right now, you're probably needing to pay a premium to do so. And the problem is, once the whole economy changes, how are you going to look at that employee knowing that they're overpaid in that marketplace or in their space? And quite honestly, a reduction in wage it just doesn't work. It doesn't go over. You're going to end up losing that employee. So you need to find other strategic ways to keep them happy, keep them with your business, but not put yourself in a situation where it's going to be unfavorable when the market changes. So are they sustainable? No, they're not. Especially the price tag that's coming with some new key employees is really high and really hard to pass that along to customers.
I do think that as you talk about, is this sustainable? I agree with you, Nikki, 100%. It's not. And so I think the one thing that people are going to really need to do right now to retain their employees is they're going to have to try to find non-financial ways to incentivize and retain them. We've heard a lot about flexibility. I know that there's some industries that just can't be as flexible as others. but offering some type of flexibility in their schedule to make it work for them, to incentivize them. I think we need to look at any types of little perks and benefits. I think we really need to look at providing feedback and promoting employees that deserve to be promoted. And I really like the book. I don't know if anyone's read it. I recommend it, Good to Great, but they talk about having the right people on the right seat. And I think getting a really good team in place and making sure that your team is working as one cohesive unit and having all the right people on the right seat within your team. I think those are things that will help. If you can't get beyond the pay, I think we need to look at outside of the pay to figure out ways to continue to retain people and make work fun. Nobody wants to go to a job that they hate with people that they don't like. That's where I think focusing on the team and make it fun.
You hear a lot more
And, you
about
know,
culture now than you used to, right? A lot more about
Right.
culture. Yeah.
And when doing exit interviews, you are going to hear some about compensation. Likely they might be getting a boost, but it's always something different. Like, it's not always just the compensation. So I think really, to pull your employees on what are these benefits that we give you that you really appreciate? And what don't you appreciate as much? And really to tailor your benefit package to meeting their needs is really important as well.
Well, Nikki, we've had a couple questions come in on the labor challenge piece. You've touched on, kind of touched on this a little bit, but somebody chatted in, we use salary grades, and because our employees have long tenure, regularly bump up against the maximum necessitating lump sum distributions. Are salary grades antiquated? What's a better approach of managing pay rates?
Yeah, that's a real good question. And salary grades are really what most people are doing. So typically hiring an outside advisor to help them or help businesses with those grades. And really that tells you, hey, am I in the market space for this key employee? And it doesn't specifically look just at the employee, but it looks at, hey, what job duties are they doing? How much responsibility are they taking to grade that? Yes, your tenured employees are probably going to be at the higher side of your pay grade, but hopefully they're providing you the most value. So if you feel like you're having a problem between your pay grades and you feel like you're overpaying people, it's probably because you don't feel like they're providing that value. And then that's a whole another discussion on, maybe there's issues there outside of it. There's probably performance issues that are making you feel the way that you do.
And I am a huge proponent of bonuses, of really looking at not a standard, but having a range of a salary, but then really incentivizing people with bonuses and tying those bonuses to performance. As Nikki said, if there's performance issues, it's hard to take that away in a salary. But having bonuses that are tied to performance, it could be performance based on overall company, based on a group, based on the individual, but having a bonus that if the company does well, that you're not afraid to pay that individual then based on what the metrics are. It holds them accountable. It definitely makes that increased pay a little bit easier if you're tying it around performance to the company. Now, one of the things that I think is really important with that too is then having some transparency into that. I think it's very difficult to bonus someone or have a bonus plan in place without providing them the transparency of what they need to earn that bonus. And so there might be some financial information that needs to be shared with employees or key employees, but I think that's important to be able to have that in place as well.
And the problem with a lot of bonus structures is they aren't a big enough percentage of a employee's discretional wages that it's not really gonna affect how they act. So Nancy and I have been working on saying, well, what is the wage versus what is a percentage of discretionary bonus that really can be tailored and can really alter how people are acting and meeting goals. Because many businesses, their percentage of bonus, the discretionary bonus is too low, that employees don't see it. They almost see it as, well, that's just part of their wages. And oftentimes you don't dock them because their percentage is so low that it's not as meaningful as if you make it a larger percentage.
So when you're talking about, Nancy, you talked about transparency with customers before and open communication. You just mentioned it again when it comes to bonuses. But Nikki, you know, in what other ways is transparency with your employees important? Like what shifts have you seen? Is it just in the bonus plan? Is it sharing more financials? What do you see companies doing?
So people want to be in the know, right? Especially now we've had more data. Some of the younger employees have had more data their entire careers. So they expect to get more of that data. They want to feel like they're a part of something. I mean, we all want to feel like we're a part of something. That's what makes us tick. And without data or without transparency, you're missing a key component. And quite honestly, staff retention, people stay at a business because they like their coworkers. They like the business owner. And without transparency, you're not going to build that connection. So I think it's so overarching as far as employees are demanding more transparency than they ever have before, but we really need to get there in order to keep our key employees.
Yeah, I do think it's important. I think in this next generation entering, leadership, I think it's very important that they know that they're all moving in the same direction. And I think people need to know what is that direction we're moving in. And that's where I think the transparency really comes in. You just want to make sure that you're all rowing the boat in the same direction.
So somebody just chatted in a question about stay interviews. And hold on, let me get this up here. But so we started doing stay interviews about a year ago and stopped doing them shortly afterwards. I guess that, I don't know, maybe you can provide us more color on that, but what have you guys been seeing as far as what your clients have been doing with stay interviews? Have they been successful?
I guess my comment is be careful what you ask. And if you're not prepared to act on it, I think that's where stay interviews can be a problem. I think it's good to get the information, but I think having information and not acting on it is worse than asking the question. So I think you have to be cautious with that, and you have to be prepared to act on whatever the issues are. I do not have a lot of clients that are doing stay interviews. I think there is keeping a pulse on the staff and having different meetings, quarterly reviews, more evaluations, things like that, but not specifically stay interviews. But I think for some companies, it's a great idea. I just think you just need to be prepared to act on the outcome.
And then we talked about bonuses and potentially retention bonuses. What are you both seeing in your client base as far as the number of clients or the types of clients that are offering retention bonuses?
Yeah, I'm seeing it. Industries, hospitality didn't typically, there was less of a bonus eligible employees per se, but I'm seeing it become even more wide range. Hey, let's consider bonusing out employees. I'm also seeing hiring bonuses to try to get some of those key employees versus, paying them a much higher salary. Is maybe there's an enticing signing bonus that you can allow them. So I'm seeing just bonuses and the structure of bonuses and some of the creativity within bonuses at an all-time more than I've ever seen in the past.
Okay, well, yeah, go ahead. Did you have something, Nancy?
I was just going to say, one of the things that we didn't really talk about is we talked a lot about retention, and Lee, maybe I'm jumping the gun on this, maybe you were going to ask. But I think one of the things too that everybody needs to do is look at your current recruiting efforts. And, it's so hard to even find staff right now. And I think as we're recruiting, we can't do what we've always done because we're going to have the same outcome, which is probably not finding people. So I think people need to really, really get creative with recruiting right now as well. And I know, one of the things that we've always done is we've always looked at the universities, and we've done a lot of events at universities. And we're now starting to go kind of outside of that scope, and we're looking at technical colleges, and we're looking at private colleges, and we're looking out of state. I mean, because again, we can't expect a different outcome if we keep doing the same thing. So I think people need to really get creative with recruiting right now as well. I actually had an electrician of mine. He actually took a job instructing at WCTC, and he did it for 100% selfish reasons, was to pick the best people in that class and recruit them for his company, you know, bring them on as apprentices.
That's very creative.
He probably would have done it for nothing because he was getting really good qualified people out of it.
Yeah, the overarching theme I keep hearing from the two of you is being proactive and creative and not reactive and doing the same thing you've always done. Before we move on from labor challenges, I want to get one more poll question out there and just find out, you know, do you currently offer sign-on bonuses for new employees, retention bonuses for existing employees, or in the last 2 years, have you started offering new performance bonuses for employees? You get a sense of where everybody's there, and you can click more than one there. Click all that apply. This is another one. I'd love to see the results again in 1 year. Okay, so majority has put in new performance bonuses in the last couple of years. And look at that, more companies offering retention bonuses than sign-on bonuses. It's kind of an interesting, that is interesting. Well, it'll be interesting to see how everybody starts to incorporate new habits going forward. Let's quickly touch on, sorry, Nancy, again, it was probably the least, it was the one that people were the least interested in, but let's just talk about inventory level planning. You know, how often should people be counting their inventory, or, you know, talk about maybe a move towards more, you know, automating that or implementing some software. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of these things I touched on in the supply chain, but quickly, I do think automation is a key right now. I think if you haven't automated your inventory, now is the time to do so, because again, you don't want to be going in the back and looking to see what you have, or be in the middle of a manufacturing line and find you don't have enough product. So I think it's important to have automation, to have the system set up to give you indicators, you know, to have low inventory indicators when you get low on that item, that'll automatically reorder, and give yourself enough time for that. So automation is going to be the key right now. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. The other thing I think is for people to really understand what their priorities are with their inventory. You know, is there priority reducing their storage costs? Is it keeping inventory on hand to be able to make that? What is the priority? And kind of develop an inventory management plan around your priority. You know, the whole just-in-time inventory, that was a big thing, what, 10, 15 years ago? Yeah, that's not the case anymore, because we can't get that product right away. Some of the other things, if you are just a distributor, you could look at drop shipping. Retailers, I'm seeing people doing a lot with consignment inventory right now that we've never really seen before. So they're putting together great programs for consignment inventory. So those are just some things that you can be looking at. But again, it's really understanding your inventory, understanding your needs, automating it, prioritizing it, and then planning for it. So
and you really have to weigh
summary.
the cost versus benefit of, well, it's 100% away from what we would have told you 4 years ago, but you know, yes, maybe you need to have more inventory levels than you've had before, but then you also need to, you know, take into consideration the risk with that. You're buying at a high now. What if the prices go down? You have all the holding costs. Is it going to go obsolete? So there's a lot of risks involved with it too, that you really need to make some intentional decision.
And Nikki, you had mentioned, you and I were having a conversation earlier about car dealers and
Yeah,
inventory. And I think we've all seen what's going on there. And do you think we'll ever get back to a situation where somebody can walk on a lot and pick from 10 different cars that they want and
I mean, you used to have,
drive away with it?
yeah, you used to have car lots, then they had overstock lots, and I don't think we're gonna get somewhere in between what we had before and where we're at now. But, think about the automotive industry and all the floor plan financing and how expensive that was, that it really makes sense to get somewhere in between.
And I do think real quickly, I had a conversation with someone yesterday and they brought up COVID. And I don't believe that COVID is the sole reason that we are in the situation we're in. I do think that COVID accelerated it. But I think if you look prior to COVID, I think a lot of these things were starting to creep up on us. And I think COVID just accelerated it. So I don't think we can necessarily blame COVID. I think that it was definitely contributed to it. But I do think, to Nikki's point, that we're going to end up somewhere between where we were and where we are now.
So knowing we're just we're a minute past time, but we've had a few more questions come in. There's one that I'd like to ask you both on the labor challenge front. So somebody just chatted in. There have been a handful of, let me bring this back up. There have been a handful of employees that we'd consider average or below average that we've gone out of our way to keep, where in the past we would have let them walk. Can you talk about the pros and cons of this approach? I'm assuming it's because they wouldn't be able to find people to replace them.
Absolutely. And it goes into your culture. What sort of impact is that having on your culture? Also, what sort of impact is that having on your really good employees, seeing that you're tolerating something less than good? So I do feel like there's a lot of negative impacts there. But at the end of the day, sometimes I understand we just need the bodies, right? Knowing that you have to be very intentional if you do that. Communication as far as what are the impacts to your other employees, and is it creating a culture that you're not willing to accept?
Yeah, I agree with Nikki, and I think many times if they're underperforming, other people are stepping up to fill the gap, and I think you risk losing those other people. And so I think everybody has seen situations where they're hesitant to get rid of someone, and then they do, and the rest of the team goes, "Thank you. I was wondering why it took you so long." So I think it's a slippery slope. I think you have to be very careful and be very intentional about it.
Well, Nikki and Nancy, a lot of information. Thank you for sharing all your insight and specific examples as far as what you've been seeing out there. I know people find it very, very helpful. Just going to wrap up. We're already a few minutes over. I just want to let everybody know you can go to svaaccountants.com/events to sign up for other webinars in our economic impact series. The next one we have coming up is November 9th, and the topic is creating agility with key indicators and strategies. I just want to remind everybody that the SVA team is only a phone call or an email away. So if you're a client, please reach out to your SVA professional as questions arise. And if you're not currently a client, you can contact me, Lee Schwartz, so I can get you the help or the answers that you need. Nikki and Nancy, thank you again. Thanks everybody for attending, and please enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
And Lee,
Bye-bye.
thank you for facilitating.
My pleasure.